The various nations. 1. The royal capital of the Re-Estais kingdom. At its very heart lies Ro-Lente Castle. Its outer wall, roughly 800 meters in circumference, is a defensive network of 20 massive cylindrical towers, enclosing a vast expanse of land. Within its grounds stands the Valencia Palace. In a room within that palace, a place that valued function over extravagance, the court council had devolved into what could only be described as folly, a gathering of men lost in their own dreams. Now is our chance. We shall repel their forces and, without missing a step, march straight into the Empire. Indeed, I've grown quite weary of simply fending off the Empire's invasions. The time has come to show those fools who dare call themselves an empire the true meaning of fear. Without a doubt, the Count is absolutely right. The sound of the lavishly dressed men's laughter echoed through the room. Gaif, the warrior captain of the kingdom, struggled to keep his expression neutral, but inwardly he was utterly dismayed. After touring the villages, meeting the magic caster named Ainz, and rushing back to the capital to report, this was the scene that greeted him. The meeting was already a trial, coming on top of his accumulated fatigue, and it took all his effort just to fight off the encroaching weariness. In the war against the Empire, the kingdom's casualties were far greater. The kingdom conscripted commoners to form its army, while the Empire's forces were composed of professional soldiers granted the rank of knight. It was obvious at a glance which side was stronger. Every time one of the kingdom's soldiers, a commoner, was killed, the nation's strength steadily declined, even if they managed to repel the imperial invasion around the fortress city. Many believed that the Empire's true aim was simply to bleed the kingdom dry. Yet, these high nobles and their followers failed to grasp this reality. They believed their own absolute authority would last forever. We should have that magic caster apprehended at once. That area has been the kingdom's territory for over 100 years. For this magic caster to be living there without permission is unforgivable. Please wait. Seeing the court council heading in a dangerous direction, Gazef raised his voice to change its course. Several nobles made no effort to hide their displeasure, their faces twisting into scowls. To them, the high-born aristocrats, Gazef was a mere upstart who had climbed the ranks on the strength of his sword alone. For that, he was deeply despised. The fact that his skill with a blade was unmatched within the kingdom only served to intensify their animosity. For nobles of their esteemed status, being surpassed by someone of low birth was the ultimate unbearable humiliation. We should have that magic caster apprehended at once. That area has been the kingdom's territory for over 100 years. For this magic caster to be living there without permission is unforgivable. Please wait. Seeing the court council heading in a dangerous direction, Gazef raised his voice to change its course. Several nobles made no effort to hide their displeasure, their faces twisting into scowls. To them, the high-born aristocrats, Gazef was a mere upstart who had climbed the ranks on the strength of his sword alone. For that, he was deeply despised. The fact that his skill with the blade was unmatched within the kingdom only served to intensify their animosity. For nobles of their esteemed status, being surpassed by someone of low birth was the ultimate, unbearable humiliation. This magic caster seemed quite amicable toward the kingdom. To treat such an individual with hostility, we cannot rule out the possibility that he is a member of the Empire, a noble interrupted. He must be summoned to the capital for a thorough interrogation. Besides, another added, did the warrior captain truly believe the word of this suspicious magic caster and let him go? It was a hasty decision, to say the least. Several nobles spoke over Gazef, their voices rising in agreement. Quite right. Why would the warrior captain trust such a dubious figure who hides his face? It sounds suspicious no matter how you look at it. Ainz, I've never heard of a magic caster by that name. He is not of our kingdom's historic magic academy, is he? Who knows where he crawled out from? For all we know, he could be an agent of the Empire. What? If that's the case, how does the warrior captain intend to take responsibility for letting him escape? Enough. I declare that the warrior captain's judgment was not mistaken. If the king so commands. A weary, faint voice drifted from the man seated on the throne. At the king's words, the nobles reluctantly suppressed their scornful smirks. Gazef sent a grateful look to the man who had elevated him, the object of his loyalty. The king acknowledged it with a slight nod. This was Ramposa III, king of the Re-Estais kingdom. His nearly white hair was unkempt, and his slender frame was far from the picture of health. His complexion was poor, the hand gripping his royal scepter was as thin as a withered branch, and the crown on his head seemed to weigh him down. He had ruled for 41 years, and was now 62. In this kingdom, he was considered quite elderly, and should have already passed the throne to a successor. The problem was, there was no heir worthy of it. It wasn't that he had no sons, but they were far from being called capable. If the throne were to change now, the next king would be nothing more than a puppet for the great nobles behind him.
The king has spoken, but we cannot simply leave this suspicious magic caster to his own devices, one noble declared. Indeed. For now, we should bring him to the capital, by force if necessary, and interrogate him to find out who he is. But that magic caster has a servant who is likely stronger than I am, using force. Warrior captain, has your skill perhaps dulled with age? Well, it has been 4 years since that martial tournament. Gazef forced his hands to relax before they could clench into fists. He knew they were high nobles, deliberately trying to provoke him. The Re-Estais kingdom was a feudal state where the king controlled 30% of the land, the great nobles another 30%, and various other nobles the remaining 40%. The sole aim of some of these great nobles was to strip the king of his power. Tarnishing the name of Gazef, the king's sword, would undoubtedly diminish the king's arsenal. But that magic caster, Gazef thought, was far too dangerous to be used as a pawn in their power struggles. Though the man wore a mask hiding his true face, he exuded an aura that felt inhuman. Gazef wouldn't have been surprised if, beneath that mask, there was something other than a human face. And then there was that Death Knight. What would have happened if he hadn't swapped his flamberge for a broadsword at the start? The creature hadn't even been serious. At full strength, it was likely as powerful as Gazef himself. When the magic caster Ainz mentioned he could create another one given time, he had nodded as if it were a simple matter. While he probably couldn't produce such beings with ease, having even a few of them around would be more than a nuisance. It would be a catastrophe. My knights could easily bring that magic caster here. No, my house shall undertake this duty. Why, Gazef wondered, were they so quick to jump to apprehending a man who had saved a village based on nothing more than suspicion? Shouldn't they be on their knees begging him to come? The magic caster had seemed a very rational individual, but Gazef doubted he would remain passive in the face of such treatment. Gazef looked down at his own hands. He could still recall the jarring shock that ran through them when he had blocked the Death Knight's sword. Wait, if that is the case, then please entrust me with the duty of bringing the magic caster here. Several nobles smirked slyly. I wasn't aware that the warrior captain's duties include such tasks. Indeed, is he trying to overstep his authority? My, any more would be impolite, wouldn't it? Oh, you are quite right. Forgive my rudeness. A ripple of snickering spread through the nobles. The king's expression grew weary. Warrior captain, I'm afraid I cannot send you. There is a chance that imperial knights or men disguised as them might attack the villages again. Then we could entrust the village's protection to adventurers. Adventurers! Did you hear that, everyone? Yes, I did. The warrior captain himself shirking his duty to protect the common folk. An unbelievable statement. Enough. We will send a formal diplomatic party. This council is now concluded. A stir went through the room. The king's decision to treat some unknown personage as a dignitary was unacceptable to some of the nobles, and their dissatisfaction was plain on their faces. However, lacking the courage to openly defy the king's decree, they concealed their indignation by bowing their heads in unison. A heavy sense of dread lingered in Gazef's mind, the fear of making an enemy of Ainz. Exhausted by the endless power struggles and flattery that defined every council meeting, Gazef mustered his remaining strength and walked down the palace corridor toward the king's chambers. He had decided he must warn the king one more time of the danger of treating the magic caster, Ainz, lightly. The king's chambers came into view, flanked by a guard. The soldier's face was impassive, but Gazef felt not a shred of goodwill from him. He was likely a man in the pocket of one of the high nobles. "I am here to see the king. Will you announce me? Her Highness the Princess is with him at the moment." Then I shall wait in the antechamber." "As you wish." Led by the soldier, Gazef was shown into the second antechamber. Inside was the person he had expected to see. A young man, poised on the cusp of boyhood and manhood. If one had to describe him in a single word, it would be inferno. He had sharp, narrow eyes and thick eyebrows. An iron will seemed to blaze forth from his handsome, sun-tanned face, which was set in a stoic expression. His short-trimmed blonde hair was kept that way for practical reasons, for ease of movement and to prevent it from being grabbed in a fight. His enchanted full-plate armor was an unusual pure white. The scabbard of his sword, one of the finest magical blades in the kingdom, was unadorned, a testament to its purely functional design. He looked as though he was perpetually ready for battle. Indeed, if trouble were to arise, he could rush to the battlefield in an instant.
As Gazef entered, the young man bowed deeply, a gesture of clear respect. Gazef returned the gesture with a slight nod of his own. Time passed in silence. Gazef found him a difficult person to be around. It wasn't that he disliked him. In fact, he rather liked him. But he could never get used to the incredibly heavy atmosphere that surrounded the man. And as usual, trying to make conversation would likely only make it heavier. In the end, Gazef simply waited in silence for time to pass. No words were exchanged between them for the 30 minutes until a soldier came to call for him. "Thank you for waiting, Lord Gazef." "Yes, and, Lord Climb, you are to come as well." "Understood," came a raspy voice that seemed impossibly gravelly for his youthful appearance. Gazef knew the boy was likely ashamed of it, but to him it was a mark of honor, the result of training so hard it had ruined his vocal cords. Led by the soldier, the two of them entered the king's chambers together, with Gazef, of course, taking the lead. "Pardon the intrusion." As Gazef stepped inside, his eyes fell upon the king and one other person, a beautiful young woman, Renner Thier Chardalon Ryle Vyself. She was the third princess, known as the Golden Princess, having inherited her mother's radiant beauty. At 17, she was an adult, an age where it would not be strange for her to have already taken a husband, a fact that drove the ambitions of many a nobleman. She was beautiful, yes, but the word beautiful failed to capture the entirety of her charm. It was said that her beauty was so profound that no portrait could do it justice. Her golden hair, one of the sources of her moniker, was long and flowed elegantly down her back. Her lips, which one might compare to cherry blossoms, were pale but healthy color. Her eyes, a deep blue, reminiscent of sapphires, were soft and gentle. The intricate white dress she wore suited her perfectly, accentuating the golden necklace around her neck. "Excuse me?" The gravelly voice sounded from behind Gazef. Renner's smile visibly brightened. "Climb." With that single word, Renner slowly rose and padded over to the soldier standing behind her. Climb was Princess Renner's personal guard, a soldier whose skill ranked among the highest in the kingdom. On the small round table where the king and princess had been sitting were some sweets and 2 ceramic cups with a little tea remaining. They had been enjoying a private moment together. Feeling a pang of guilt for interrupting, Gazef spoke. "Your Majesty." "I know, it is about the magic caster." "Yes, Lord Ainz appears to be a man of considerable magical skill. I believe it would be dangerous to treat him dismissively. I am aware. Who would want to treat lightly a being who commands a servant that can fight you to a standstill? Then, the king raised a hand, silencing Gazef. You must understand, sending a formal diplomatic party is the most I can concede. It is a difficult compromise. To hold back the Empire's invasion, I need the nobles' power. If I were to crush their opinions head-on, the kingdom would fracture long before the Empire could. The fortress city where the Empire was invading was the king's own domain. Thus, the king bore the majority of the war expenses. The nobles contribute, of course, but their share was minuscule compared to the king's. Attempting to levy more funds would be perilous. The nobles would surely revolt, perhaps by rallying behind one of his sons and installing a puppet king. In fact, the signs of such a movement were already visible. Gazef had no words to offer. He knew it was the truth, and court intrigue and power struggles were not his forte. The king's greatest concession, sending a formal party, was the best he could do. How I envy the Empire, the king murmured. Again, Gazef had no words of comfort. 3 generations ago, the Empire had also been a feudal state. But they had systematically stripped the nobles of their power, and with the coronation of the current emperor, it had transformed into an absolute monarchy. The current emperor. Gazef recalled seeing him on the battlefield, the man who had invited him to become one of his own men. He was a true emperor, born to rule. Is he really so incredible, this magic caster? A clear, beautiful voice, like the chiming of a crystal wind chime, echoed through the room. It belonged to Renner, who had been listening quietly to their conversation from her position beside Climb. Yes, Your Highness, his abilities are beyond imagination. Is he more powerful than the court wizard? Gazef pictured the king's court wizard. He could defeat him with ease. But he couldn't even imagine defeating Ainz. In fact, he could far more easily picture himself being killed. I believe they are on completely different levels. Oh my! Renner's slender, porcelain-like fingers tugged at the edge of Climb's tunic. It was likely an unconscious gesture, but upon noticing it, Climb's expression hardened even further, becoming as rigid as a diamond. The one who chuckled was the king. Gazef fought back a wry smile. Climb, you must continue to hone your swordsmanship. Be ready to protect the princess no matter the circumstances. Climb will be fine. He's my knight, after all. It was a statement with no basis in fact. But when the princess said it, you couldn't help but believe it might be true. By the way, father, what if we were to send another envoy at the same time as the diplomatic party? Gaze and the king's eyes met. Climb, what would you do? Climb opened his mouth, then shut it firmly. Climb? At her second prompting, Climb opened his mouth as if resigned to his fate. A faint trace of blood appeared on his lip. An envoy of a higher rank than a diplomat. To convey that the royal family holds him in high esteem, the best course would be to send one who carries the king's blood. However, in that case, it would have to be done in a way that defies the king's official orders, correct? Yes, it was true. The highest form of conveying the royal family's esteem would be to send one of royal blood, someone high in the line of succession. And who was qualified for such a mission? There was no one other than the young woman standing before them, Renner the Golden. The other reason for her name came from the brilliance of her mind, from her establishment of groundbreaking institutions, and her proposal of new laws. Most of her proposals were aimed at providing relief for the common people, those of low standing, not by giving them handouts from above, but by creating opportunities for those who wish to help themselves. At the same time, her plans also benefited the royal family by elevating the status of commoners, fostering their loyalty, and increasing productivity. Though most of her initiatives were dismantled due to interference from the high nobles who despised the empowerment of commoners, she was held in extremely high regard by those with knowledge and those who had benefited from her grace. Kind yet practical, there was no one better suited for the role of envoy. But the king's decision had already been made. What Renner was proposing was an act of defiance against a royal command. To avoid showing weakness to the high nobles, the envoy would have to act as if they had departed on their own, against the king's orders. If the king's authority were stronger, he might be able to protect the envoy with a light punishment like house arrest. But now, with the great nobles holding so much power, it wouldn't end there. They could impose whatever punishment they saw fit. And if Renner were to be that envoy, the most likely punishment the nobles would want to inflict. Climb understood this as well. He knew exactly how the nobles wished to use Renner. "I cannot allow it," the king said, his voice as sharp as a sword's edge. In response, Renner bowed her head. Climb also bowed deeply. "I have overstepped. My sincerest apologies, father. I have matters to discuss with the warrior captain. The two of you may go now." "Yes, father." Taken by the hand by Renner, Climb was led away, his face expressionless, but his eyes filled with a color that could be described as pain or grief. Though they had forgotten their etiquette in their departure, the king said nothing. He simply watched them go, his eyes filled with a nostalgia for something sweet that had been lost long ago. Once they had left the room, the king's expression slowly changed. As a king, it is wrong of me to feel pity." Climb came from a background even humbler than Gazef's. To be precise, he was a child of the slums, his parentage unknown. He was a boy Renner had found during an outing in the city. Emaciated and on the verge of death, the child had striven to protect the one who saved him. Striven was too simple a word. He had no talent for the sword, no talent for magic. He was not blessed with a strong physique, but he had overcome every single obstacle, one by one. It was true that there was often an insurmountable wall between those who were born with talent and those who were not, but Climb was living proof that it could be overcome. However, there are some walls that can never be surmounted: status, power, and worth. As a princess, Renner's value was immeasurably high, far too high for Climb to ever match. "I understand your feelings, Your Majesty." "Yes, and Count Lyton has been so persistent." "About the princess?" "Indeed." The king glared into the empty space as if someone were standing there. "The damnable thing is that what he says is correct. In the end, I may have to make that daughter of mine unhappy as well." Gazef said nothing. He had no words to offer, nothing to say. The anguish of being a king could only be understood by another who held the same position, and that was not him. Silence fell between the two men as time slowly passed.